Welcome to Reflections, Monday's short-form studio feature ahead of Friday's Photo Walk podcast. Thoughtful observations on creativity and, well, just life, really. You'll find all 5 of this week's reflections on our Patreon channel, The Extra Mile. Shoulda, woulda, coulda. I'd like to introduce you today to the shoulda, woulda, coulda theory. Woulda doesn't actually appear in this piece, by the way, but it does scan better as a system of thinking. Oh, and also this is a reflection which is more, broadly about how we talk to ourselves, which is a reason for writing about it. Us creatives, we do tend to flagellate ourselves with a damp copy of Lens Monthly, metaphorically. In my early to late 20s, I was mainly a broadcaster. I would say DJ, but a colleague once said to me in a deep, gravelly voice, "A DJ, love, is someone who just plays records. You, my darling, are a broadcaster." And it stuck with me. I actually prefer broadcaster to podcaster. Broadcaster sounds much more impressive. It validates my skill set, I think. That probably says something about me that I need therapy for. Funny you should say that. We'll come back to it. Anyway, DJ, presenter or broadcaster, love, I was the bloke on the radio who sounded upbeat, kept the jokes coming, and filled the gaps between songs with lightness and good cheer. I suppose to anybody listening, life must have seemed perfectly fine for me. I suppose to some I must have been perfectly irritating too. I was young, I was doing the job I'd dreamed about. I was living in a world where music and microphones paid the rent. On paper, things are going well. But life rarely reads like it looks on paper. Underneath the laughter and the confidence, things weren't quite as neatly packaged. My personal relationship at the time was faltering. It felt confusing, frustrating, and if I'm honest, it was driving me quietly mad. Is this a love story, Neil? Sounds like it's a love story. Sit down, grab the popcorn. Yeah, you're good at this stuff. You are, yes. This was my first big tangle in love. My first serious test of how to cope when something that's meant to be the heart of your happiness begins to gnaw at your leg instead. A friend at the time, seeing the cracks, suggested therapy. Or as we would have probably called it back then, counselling. I thought, this is not something I want to shout from the rooftops about. In fact, I didn't tell a soul. Not my family, not my colleagues. Being very Britishly British about it, I slipped away quietly once a week as if I was sneaking into a side door of life, hoping nobody would notice. I guess if somebody asked where I was heading, I'd probably mumble something brilliantly vague, because we're very guarded about such stuff in this country. What do they say about us? They do it with their socks on, they do. Neil, must you be so brazen? Back then, talking about therapy felt a bit like Victorian times, when people would lower their voices before mentioning anything to do with sex or money. The very idea that you might admit to struggling with your thoughts or feelings was embarrassing, as if you'd failed some invisible test of stip-up-a-lip blighty resilience. In America, the culture's practically the opposite, isn't it? It's not unusual to mention your therapist in the same sentence we might mention our window cleaner. Absolutely normal. Nothing to see here. Adults treat it as an essential life-affirming chat. Children see therapists not because they're in crisis necessarily, but to help them process the normal turbulence of growing up in a social media world. I used to wonder if this was a cultural quirk, or if perhaps the British suspicion of therapy was really about our fear of vulnerability. Well, I've thought about it since, anyway. After all, the therapy asks you to sit in a room with a stranger and take your emotional coat off. Being emotionally naked, well, that's not something we've historically been very comfortable with. All right, I'll take my coat off, but I'm keeping my socks on, if you don't mind. I don't remember all the sessions I had, but I do remember the first few. I sat in a rather well-appointed day room in a reasonably posh house. It was window-lit in this office, and I talked to a woman whose name I can't recall for this feature, which embarrasses me slightly. but her words have stayed with me ever since. We didn't meet for long, perhaps only a few months, yet it was long enough for her to point something out that changed the way I spoke to myself, and in turn, how I treated myself. For a while, at any rate. I do find myself slipping these days, all the time. Anyway, she said, I use the word should too much. Should? At first I brushed this nonsense off. Who cares? Everyone says should. It's harmless. But then she explained the weight of it. Should, she told me, was a word I used like a club. I should be happier. I should know what to do. I should stay. I should go. Each one of these shoulds was a stick I was apparently beating myself with. She suggested trying a different word. Could. It sounds so small, doesn't it? Almost laughably so. Just swap out one word for another. How much was I paying for this? But that tiny change altered the tone of the whole sentence. I could leave. I could make a change. I could decide differently. Could was lighter. It carried possibility. It gave me, this is the word she used, choice. Should was obligation. Could was freedom. And that is a lesson that's lived with me. Even now, decades later, I catch myself with a string of shoulds rattling around my head. They creep in when I'm tired, or when life feels heavy, or when I'm convinced I've fallen short in some way. I should exercise more. I should call so-and-so. I should write that letter. I should be more patient. Should is relentless. It never ends. Because it says you're failing at something. Or rather it implies, at any rate. But when I manage to stop myself and swap it for could, the whole conversation in my head does soften. I could exercise. It feels like an option, not a demand. I could call so-and-so. I could write that letter. It gives me agency. I could be more patient. It recognises that growth is possible, not compulsory. But I don't want to sound like one of those self-help books, and I'm acutely aware I'm starting to. In a feature that's all about language, that's what podcasting is about, broadcasting, broadcasting, how two words that sound so alike can send your inner life in completely different directions is quite interesting. One ties you up in guilt, the other opens up possibility. I do think there are moments for should. I don't entirely agree with her reasoning for everything, but I've thought about this a lot since those sessions, and this is one of those pieces I've been writing to wait for a while. Writing to wait for a while? Waiting to write for a while. I could go back and edit that bit, I suppose. It's not really about grammar or vocabulary, it's about how we speak to ourselves when nobody else is listening. That running commentary in our heads, the narrative that never quite switches off, particularly when we're making photographs. It's got the power to either wear us down or lift us up, cue the song. And as photographers, boy, oh boy, do we speak to ourselves in a way we wouldn't expect people to speak to us if we popped down the pub. Imagine if we spoke to ourselves the way we'd speak to a friend. If a friend told you they were struggling, would you say, well, you should have tried harder? Probably not. You'd say, well, you could try that again. Or you could take a break. You'd offer compassion, not condemnation. Again, not wishing to sound like a self-help book, I think some of this is habit. We don't notice the words we're using because they're woven into this daily monologue. But words do matter. They do carry history, associations, and tone. The difference between should and could is the difference between a closed door and an open one. There are words or phrases I could stop using. I'll never get better at this. I'm rubbish. What a waste of time. Cool, why is their stuff always better than mine? Therapy taught me that, though I didn't fully appreciate it at the time. I was too busy worrying about who might find out I was sneaking off once a week to confess my confusion to a total stranger. In the end, therapy wasn't something I stuck with for years. I haven't seen one since then. But the gift it gave me was lasting, the realization that words I feed myself are as important as the food I eat. Oh, I do like a nice donut. So I think it's time not necessarily for therapy, but for a revisit to the concept of what I've called shoulda, woulda, coulda. Some kind thoughts when I look back at my work and what I could be doing to improve it. Or me. Or the podcast. Keep calm and practice could. Could be a t-shirt, couldn't it? And obviously being very British, I'm going to keep my socks on at all times.